Okay, we are starting chapter 8, the Civil War. In that video we just saw, it talked about Charlie Goddard. When we go to Fort Snelling in May, we're going to learn even more about Charlie Goddard and what he went through. So I really want us paying attention to the whole chapter, of course, but really trying to remember all those things that we're learning about Charlie Goddard, because it's going to come back when we go to Fort Snelling. And not just Charlie Goddard, but all of the stuff that we're learning in this chapter. So it's only the end of February now. We still have a few months because it's too cold to be outside at Fort Snelling, but that is going to come back when we go there. I did not print out the key terms page, but you do need to pay attention to these key terms as we go through our chapter. The abolitionist, what it means to secede, the Union, the Confederacy, Emancipation Proclamation, and the Amendment. So really pay attention to those as we go through our chapter. So when we start on this first page of the introduction, on our comprehension page, it says, what were the major differences between the North and the South in the years before the Civil War? Differences is plural, okay? So we're going to listen to what the North had, what the South had. If you say the North is purple and the South is yellow, that's one difference. Okay? You can't say the North this, the South that, and count it as two things. All right, so you need to list major differences and not just the North was this, the South was that. That doesn't count for two.
On July 4th, 1858, a new star was officially added to the blue field of the U.S. flag. It represented the nation's newest state, Minnesota. The flag now had 32 stars, each representing a different state. All was not well in the land of the Stars and Stripes, though. In fewer than 3 years, the nation would be at war, and thousands of Minnesotans would head off to join the fight. By 1858, many Americans had come to think of their nation as having two parts, North and South. The two regions had many similarities, but they also had many differences. The North was a place of big cities, big factories, and farms that produced goods and food for a growing population. The South had only a few large cities and factories, as well as far fewer railroad tracks. On its farms grew many different crops, but its agricultural economy depended largely on three: sugar, tobacco, and especially cotton. Its population was growing more slowly than the North's, and fewer immigrants were settling there. These were all major differences. There was one, though, that was driving a wedge between North and South more than any other. That difference was slavery.
We're going to talk about slavery in another section. Focus on all those differences that was packed into that one paragraph. Lots of differences. The North had this and this and this. The South had this and this and this. List all of those differences. In the blue box, we are going to be learning about Dred and Harriet Scott. Has anybody heard of Dred Scott? Yeah. So some of us, when we were doing our research for our History Day projects, that kind of came up for a few of us, especially those talking about Harriet Tubman. So you guys probably have the best idea about it, because this is more in your time period. So we're going to learn about Dred and Harriet Scott and how that played a part in Minnesota.
Dred and Harriet Scott. Dred Scott and Harriet Robinson were enslaved people brought to Fort Snelling by their owners. They met at Fort Snelling and married in 1836. After their wedding, Harriet Scott's owner, Indian agent Lawrence Tolliver, either sold her or gave her to her husband's owner. He was Dr. John Emerson, a military surgeon stationed at the fort.
So both of their owners came from a state that had slavery, and they came up to Fort Snelling. They met, fell in love, and got married. So now comes the question, they're in Minnesota. Any guess why this might cause a problem? Adeline? Not yet. There's no slavery in Minnesota. There never has been, and there never will be. So they came from a state where there were slaves. They were brought up to Fort Snelling, and now what happens? So we're going to see what the Supreme Court rules in the Dred Scott court case.
Fort Snelling was in free territory. Slavery was illegal in free territory, but no one tried to enforce the law. When Dr. Emerson returned to Missouri, a state where slavery was legal, he took Dred and Harriet Scott with him. In 1846, the Scotts sued for freedom in the Missouri courts. They claimed that because they had lived in a free territory, they were free. For the next 11 years, the case filtered through the court system until it reached the U.S. Supreme Court. In a landmark 1857 decision, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against the Scotts and refused to give them their freedom.
So, they were up in Minnesota, free territory. Then they got brought down to Missouri, that's a slave state, and they said, wait a minute, we were living up in Minnesota and we were free. Now we're coming down to Missouri and we have to be slaves? No, we should be free. What does the Supreme Court? It goes all the way up the courts because everybody has different opinions on this. What does the Supreme Court decide? Christina.
The Supreme Court decided that they did not have a legal right to prevent slavery.
Yeah, they ruled against the Scots and did not give them their freedom. Oy. Okay, it's not gonna play it. It did in the other class. Silly technology. So the court stated that the African Americans were not citizens, so they had no rights under the Constitution. The ruling also stated that enslaved people were considered property, not people. Thank goodness we know so much better now, and we've learned from the mistakes of the past. The slave owners could not be deprived of property. That same year, though, the Scots owner freed them. They decided for their own reasons, you know what, we don't want to have slaves. It's not okay. So they gave them their freedom. Dred, Harriet, and their two daughters, Eliza and Lizzie, lived together in freedom for a little over a year. Then in 1958, Dred Scott died of tuberculosis, a common lung disease at that time. So again, like we talked about with the saints of the day today, they died young because they didn't have the medicine that we have now. Same thing with the tuberculosis. We have medicine for it now, but they didn't way back then. So he was only free for 1 year. That's really sad. Oh, I don't know what's going on here. The U.S. Supreme Court's decision in this case was an important factor in the coming of the Civil War. The ruling said that the Congress did not have the legal right to prevent slavery from expanding. Many Southerners believed that meant the right to enslave people was now protected forever. Many Northerners feared slavery would spread into Western territories if they didn't do something to stop it. People on both sides became more firm in their beliefs. It was hard to imagine how the two sides would come together. More and more Americans became convinced that war was coming. Did war come?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So what happens when people don't stop and listen to each other and talk about things? They just got more and more upset. Let's see. I am not sure what is going on. Let me try this. I think I just might need to start over. That has never happened to me before. That was interesting. All right, so now we're at land of the free. What were two differences in how Northerners and Southerners viewed slavery? So again, saying, well, the North is purple and the South is yellow is not two things. That's one difference. They were different colors. I'm using that as an example. That is not anything that's real. Just getting you to understand differences. If you say the North is this, the South is this, that counts for one. You need to list two differences. So as we listen, on this first page, it's going to talk about the North. The next page, it'll talk about the South.
Land of the free? Ever since its beginning in 1776, the United States had struggled to live up to the ideal found in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. Slavery prevented this ideal from being achieved. Many Americans owned enslaved African Americans, and the U.S. Constitution even contained words that made slavery legal. By the early 1800s, slavery was beginning to divide the country in two. In the North, more and more people were coming to believe slavery was morally wrong and unprofitable. States like Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania passed laws making it illegal for one person to own another person. Newer northern states such as Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin banned slavery right from the start. It was a different story in the South. While some Southerners believed slavery was wrong, many more believed it was essential to their way of life. Farmers in the South, especially those owning plantations or very large farms, needed cheap labor in order to make their sugar, tobacco, and cotton crops profitable. A new type of cotton plant and the invention of the cotton gin, a machine that separated the fiber of the cotton plant from its seeds, had turned cotton into an especially profitable crop. Southern plantation owners depended more than ever on their enslaved people to pick cotton.
So we saw what the majority in the North thought, but was that what everybody in the North thought? No. Now, this paragraph is telling us what a lot of people in the South thought, but not everyone. It does say some Southerners believed slavery was wrong, but many more believed it was essential in their way of life. Okay, so you're going to put down the major differences that the majority of people in the North thought, the majority of people in the South thought.
Southerners were not the only people who supported slavery. Some Northerners believed that the South should be allowed to keep slavery and that enslaved people who had escaped should be returned to their owners. Nearly all Northerners did agree on one thing, however. They didn't want slavery to spread into the West as new states were formed. Many white Southerners did. Decisions about whether slavery would exist in these new Western states were important because they determined which side would have more power in the U.S. government. Of all the questions involving slavery, this one seemed hardest to resolve. Like Northerners in other states, Minnesotans had varying feelings about slavery and what to do about it. In 1860, those feelings were put to the test.
So, some people in Minnesota said slavery's wrong. It's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong, it should be wrong everywhere. Some people said, well, let's put your chair down so you don't actually fall. Some people said slavery's wrong, but you know, it's wrong for us in Minnesota. Down south, it might be okay. Let that state make their own rules. So it's a state by state case of if we're going to have slavery or not. And some people said, I'm okay with slavery. The majority of the people in Minnesota were saying no to slavery in Minnesota. We're going to see some of the reactions that happen as this becomes a bigger topic. So let's look back at the economics of slavery and how even though there was not slavery in Minnesota, we still profited from slavery. it still helped us, which is why some people were okay with it being down in the South.
The economics of slavery. A circular flow model is used to show the interaction of buyers and sellers in a market economy. This model shows how slavery connected the North to the South. The marketplace connected buyers and sellers even when they came from different regions. For example, a farmer from the South made money from cotton grown on his farm that was used to make clothing. If a factory owner or employee from the North made money from producing clothing, that person was connected economically to cotton produced by slave labor. As a result, even places that outlawed slavery, like Minnesota, benefited from it.
Okay, so let's look at this flow chart. Southern plantations received something from the North because they provided something to the northern factories, right? So the plantations are providing to the factories and they're receiving this in return. So the plantations receive this from the North because they're giving that. Then the opposite is true with the factories. The factories are receiving what from the North because they provide this to the South. So think about this. What is it that the North is getting from the South? Adeline?
Cotton.
Yes. Because they want to make clothes. Now, the plantations have cotton. Who's picking the cotton? Eleanor.
Slaves.
Slaves. Do the plantation owners have to pay the slaves? No, they're slaves. They work for free. So are they going to sell that cotton for a whole lot of money? Not a whole lot, because they didn't have to spend much to grow that cotton, to pick the cotton. So they're going to say, well, we want to make a profit. So maybe to plant and to water, it costs, let's say, $5. So we're going to sell it to the North for $7. So we can make a little profit off of it, right? What happens if slavery is abolished? What's going to happen to this system that they have set up, right?
The cotton would get more expensive
Why would the cotton become more expensive?
because people actually have to work to get the cotton.
Because now instead of having slaves picking the cotton for free, they have to pay people to pick the cotton. So now instead of it costing $5 for them to grow this cotton, plant the seeds, water it, now they have to pay for the labor, another $5 to pay the people picking the cotton. So are they going to sell it to the North for $7? No, now they might sell it to the North for $15 because they need to make a profit. So the North, even though they don't allow slaves, is still benefiting from slavery because things are cheaper. Because the people doing all the work in the South aren't getting paid for it, they sell it cheaper. They have to pay for it. All of a sudden that price goes up then for the North. So this is where it gets tricky. When people say, oh, we don't have slavery in Minnesota, we were still profiting from it. Our factories were able to make clothes cheaper because they didn't have to pay so much for the cotton. Adeline?
Are those colors customary?
Yes. It's just showing that the South is giving the cotton, the factories are giving the money. Shows that the factories are selling the clothing, the South is paying for the clothing. Okay, so it's just showing the way that it goes. All right, moral dilemma.
So what? A moral dilemma. Sometimes values in society conflict with each other. In the 1860s and today, two important values existed: making money and treating people fairly. A major cause of the Civil War was that these values were in conflict. Some said that it was morally wrong and unfair to enslave another person. Others felt that slavery was an economic necessity and that their way of life would not survive if it went away. People had strong opinions about what should be done about it, and many were willing to die for their beliefs. Can you think of a current event that causes people to debate the choice between making money and treating people fairly?
Does that still happen in today's world? Are people still debating it? In? How? When? Like, what would be an example of people debating, well, do we want to keep our prices so we can afford it, or do we want to pay people more? Because we don't have slaves, so people are getting paid, but are they always getting paid a fair wage? That minimum wage keeps getting raised up because the cost of living keeps going up. If we don't pay people something that they can live on, it's not right. It's not treating them with dignity and respect. Right? We're not looking out for those people. Harper?
It's inflation.
It is inflation. And as one thing goes up, the other has to go up. If that cost of living is going up and you're still being paid what you were paid in the year 2000 when you were hired, and you're living in 2025, are you going to be able to afford to pay for your house, to pay for your food, to pay for the car? No. Because you need both to rise up together, right? If you're working at Target, being the cashier, checking people out, and you're getting that same money, that minimum wage hasn't gone up, you're getting what you made 10, 15, 20 years ago when you were hired. Gas prices have gone up. You all have seen that in your lifetime, gas prices going up. Price of eggs at the store, my goodness, last time I bought eggs, it was like $6.99 for my carton of 18. That's ridiculous. It used to be $1. And that was just 3 years ago. Prices go up. So we need to pay people more so they can live. Natalie?
I was gonna say, the eggs are getting more expensive because the egg farm went up, went up fire or something.
There's always something. There's bird flu that hits here. There's this. Yeah, the egg prices go up and down. But if you're not getting paid, the eggs are not going to go down to $1.29 again. That I was paying 3-4 years ago. They're not going to get that low again. Gas prices are not going to be $1.75 like it used to be 10 years ago. They've gone up and they're going to stay up. Maybe they'll come down into the $2 range, but they're not going to be down in the dollar range anymore. Right? Inflation, prices are going up. We need to be able to pay people so they can afford that. Adeline?
Is that why people, got a little part of, really, really well doing businesses?
I don't understand your question. Try it again.
Like some people buy really, really tiny parts of businesses to get, some.
So they're playing the stock market. We're going to talk about that when it gets to be the 1900s. So right now we're in the 1800s, so it's coming in a few chapters, but we will talk about that, and that'll make more sense to you. All right, so now, freedom for Eliza Winston. So we're going to, let's listen to this first little bit, and then I'll talk about the paper.
Freedom for Eliza Winston. The Mississippi River had become a highway between Minnesota and the cotton plantations of the South. Hundreds of steamboats traveled on the river, carrying passengers in comfort and style. Many of these passengers were wealthy Southerners taking what was called the Fashionable Tour, a popular steamboat trip that traveled the Mississippi River. Hotels in St. Anthony and Minneapolis welcomed the Southern visitors because they were good for business. These Southerners sometimes created a problem when they brought their enslaved household workers with them. In the summer of 1860, a well-to-do Mississippi plantation owner named Richard Christmas arrived in St. Anthony. He was accompanied by his wife, Mary, their child, and an enslaved servant named Eliza Winston. Winston's duties were to care for the child and to wait on a sickly Merry Christmas. When Winston reached Minnesota, she knew she was in a free state, but she wasn't sure what that meant.
They're coming from Mississippi. They have slaves. She's a slave. But now they come to visit Minnesota. Is she a slave? Minnesota doesn't have slavery. So is she still a slave because they're visiting? Or is she not a slave because they came up to Minnesota? This is gonna cause lots of problems. This is where the conflict really starts to come in. On your paper, we have this paragraph is written out as that first box. The Christmas family arrives in Minnesota with their enslaved woman, Eliza Winston. Then we have 5 blank boxes. It says to fill the boxes with pictures and text. You can just use your words. You don't have to do pictures. But you're going to tell the story of what we're going to listen to. You need to have 5 parts to that story that you are going to fill in. Robbie?
Does it matter what parts in what box?
Well, it should go in order, okay? So after this box, you're gonna come to this box, go in order as it goes, okay?
Did it mean she could just walk away from her master? If she did, where would she go? How would she live? Would anyone help her? These questions were answered when she met Emily and Ralph Gray, a free African-American couple who lived in St. Anthony. The Grays were friends of Frederick Douglass, who had escaped slavery. He was an abolitionist who was working to end it. Abolitionists made up a nationwide movement of both African Americans and European Americans who sought freedom for all. The Grays wanted to help Eliza Winston become free. With the help of some white friends, the Grays convinced Judge Charles Vanderburg to consider Winston's case. Vanderburg sent a sheriff to the house where the Christmases were staying with an order to take Winston into custody.
So Eliza Winston wonders, am I free? Am I a slave? She meets the Grays, who are a free black couple. They are not slaves anymore. They say, you should be free. Let's go talk to the judge, because we want you to be free. But then the sheriff comes, and the sheriff says, nope, we're taking you into custody because you need to go back to the Christmases. How about escape? Mhm. Yes. Okay. Perfect. Yep. Bye. Who knows which phone is Christina's? Bridget, can you get Christina's phone and pack up all of her stuff and bring it down to the nurse's office for her, please? Thank you. Okay, so this is where we're at with Eliza Winston. So the sheriff came to take her into custody, but people are saying, no, she should go back to her slave owners. Now what's going to happen?
That evening, the judge held a hearing. The whole town was excited. Abolitionists were joyful because they believed the state law was being enforced. Others claimed that Winston had been kidnapped. They worried that publicity about the case would drive away rich Southern visitors. Minnesota merchants depended on the money these visitors spent. Vanderburg heard arguments from both sides and quickly gave his ruling. Eliza Winston was no longer enslaved. She was free to go where she pleased. Finding a place to go, however, would not be easy. That night, a mob of people surrounded the Grays' house, where they thought Winston was staying. They demanded that she be returned to the Christmases. Some threw stones through the windows, and others broke into the home. They searched for Winston, but she was not there. The Grays and their friends had sent Winston to a safe location out of town. It's not known exactly where she went during this time, but she did return to the area a few months later to speak to an abolitionist group.
Again,
It's not clear what happened to her after that.
Financial raffle tickets, those are overdue, but we are still missing quite a few. So again, check those backpacks, check those lockers, check home, check the kitchen counter, check the office, check everywhere to make sure you guys have turned in your Catholic United financial tickets. And now we have 3 weeks worth of blue ticket winners we would like to announce because these people deserve their prize. So if you hear your name and you get your teacher's permission, you may come down for your prize. In kindergarten, we have Julia Burke, Murphy Anderson, Michael Waldorf, Sophia Dodry, Avery Johnson, and Eli Deely. In first grade, we have Leona Groon, Brennan Moen, Isaac Link, Evie Mueller, Brooke Bogus, Nolan Ferris. In second grade, we have Malia Mitchell, Max Crocker, Abby Rosenthal, Jordan Steele, Vincent Deely, Harper Arnson. In third grade, we have Caitlin Braun, Cooper Cashman, Matthias O'Link, Simon Anderson, Maggie Ford, and Jake Bowman. In fourth grade, we have Oscar Carroll, Mariah Wenthold, Brooke Podobinski, Elliot Downing, Natalie Rantenstrider, Peter Boutros. In fifth grade, we have Chase Flynn, Moses Spencer, Charlotte Austin, Haley Gates, Evelyn Hosker, Brian Engelkeys. In sixth grade, we have Liam Rosario, Bennett Darbo, Rocco Jones, Vivi Bourne, James Darbo, Fallon McCarthy. In seventh grade, we have Melanie Simmons, Kelly Whiteford, Lilia O'Melianchuk, Raimi Pugh, Asher Maxine, Liam Mayhew. And in eighth grade, we have Emmett Brenner, Tiana Jefferson, Evelyn Hope, Aiden Bowman, Ella Kopicki, and Oleg Severad. That is our blue ticket winner. Congratulations, thank you. Remember to be kind, be brave, believe, speak strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Have a great Thursday evening.
Okay, so the judge, what did the judge rule? He let her be free. You're in Minnesota. Minnesota is a free state. You are free. Is it a state at this time or a territory? They're free. So he freed her. Did everybody say, oh, cool, got it. The judge says you're free, we're good. Is that what happened?
No.
No, what happened? A mob formed. They said, no, she is a slave. She should remain a slave. This is going to change everything and we don't want change to happen. So a mob came and they did knock on the door and say, hey, can Eliza please go back to her slave owners? No, they broke into the house. They threw bricks at the window. They tried searching for her to make her return to the Christmases. Was Eliza there? No, because the Grays said, this is going to get dangerous. People are going to be angry. So they sent her somewhere safe to be free. So she wouldn't get captured by the mob. In the end, she did come back months later to speak to the abolitionist group. So we know that she survived, that she was fine. They didn't find her, and she wasn't hurt. And she was able to come back once things had died down, and it was safe for her to come back. So lots of stuff on this page that was going on. You need to pick 5 things and just put it in one thing per box of what happened in her story. Adeline.
Does the court thing and the mob, are those different things or are
Those are different. Oh, yeah. So the judge ruling that she's free is a thing. Mob attacking the Gray's house is a thing. Those are different things that happened in her story.
Southerners were upset by the outcome, and tourism to the area quickly declined. Local business people such as C.W. McLean, owner of the Winslow House Hotel, were also upset. They had profited from Southern tourists and were angry at the abolitionists for hurting their business. Abolitionists in Minnesota and other northern states were pleased with the result of this case. They hoped for more successes, but they had no idea how quickly the nation would be plunged into civil war.
So the South, are they going to want to come vacation in Minnesota? No, because they can't bring their slaves with them. They're going to lose their slaves. So if they can't have the slave come to take care of the kids, to take care of the family members, they're not going to come here. They're going to vacation somewhere where they can have their slaves. So that means the tourist places in Minnesota are going to be hurting. They're not gonna have those fines coming in. So this is causing a lot of problems in Minnesota and in the country.
Wait, is the angry mob and how Ray sent her somewhere else, that's the same thing, right?
What was an angry mob and Eliza Winston living somewhere else? Is that the same thing?
Like they sent her because they knew her.
They sent her for her safety, and an angry mob came. Two different things. Okay. So, today, we finished the front side of this paper, all of these questions. If you do not have it done, you can bring your book home to work on it at home. If you just have like one box left and you want to do it just real quick at the beginning of class tomorrow, that's up to you, but that front side needs to be done because we are starting with the back side tomorrow, home of the brave. If you are listening to this at home, stop. If you are listening to this at home, I hope you are well. I hope to see you soon. Have a wonderful day.